The charcoal fire. Peter, Peter, where are you? The rocks are hot, your hands are cold. Your heart's on fire, and your feet are ready to run. Peter, 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 what can you do? 1, defend with the sword. 2, deny, deny, deny. 3, is there an option number 3? Peter, 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 what do you want? There's winning, and there's losing, and there might just be a third way. My God, what is the way? Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Lisi Schröttner, if I haven't met you yet, and welcome to those online. Before you get too afraid here, I realize this picture maybe evokes some fire, images of fire and brimstone, and I promise it's not one of those sermons, so my apologies for that. But this is a charcoal fire. So lest anyone thinks we're picking on Peter, again, Peter, I apologize, and I know Joe apologized to you last week. Sorry we're picking on you, but it just happens to be the texts that we have here. So I'm going to start off by saying we can all find ourselves in the character of Peter. Isn't that true? Peter and his stories, they represent really the experience of all the disciples, and we resonate with all of them. Of course, Peter certainly stands out as his words and actions are well recorded. And you know, he's the one on whom Christ will set the church, the rock, Peter. He's that Peter. In the Gospels, we hear stories of Peter supporting Jesus, Peter rebuking Jesus. He jumps in to show loyalty to his teacher and to the cause. Of course, with the occasional hesitation and doubt and quick thinking, or maybe not thinking. But again, Peter is not alone in his doubts and his devotion to Jesus. Most of the disciples are like that. This journey has not been easy for this group of friends. They are in this together. So the disciple stories, Peter's stories, all of it, we find ourselves in them. And we certainly find ourselves in today's story of Peter around the fire. So these are Peter's last moments with Jesus, the final tests of his direct discipleship before Jesus dies and returns in a resurrected body. In these confounding final moments, Peter comes face to face with options. Will he win? Will he lose? What does it even mean to win or lose in these scenarios? Was Peter surprised by his own actions and his own words coming out of his mouth? As Peter/Philip voiced a few moments ago, you think you know yourself. You think you know what you would do in whatever hypothetical situation. What are the choices that he's confronted with? This is our question for today. And we're looking at this as a group of Anabaptists, as the Peace Church. So we add the question, is there another option beyond winning and losing? So let's look at 3 scenarios, 3 options, and look at the invitations for us as we sit in this discomfort and as we near the cross. So the first option, winning, defending Jesus with the sword. So as the story goes, at the beginning of John chapter 18, Jesus and his disciples leave the Last Supper and go out of the city to the garden where Jesus will be turned over to the authorities. After those final quiet moments, which sees the disciples dozing off, the crowds and the police come, and the disciples are suddenly ready for a fight. In Luke's gospel, they ask, should we strike with the sword? It's not just Peter, they're all raring and ready to go. In this moment, I wonder if they think that this is Jesus' big reveal. Will Jesus finally let his power loose and strike down not just these crowds and the police, but the whole Roman imperial system? Were they expecting Jesus to rise off the ground, power surging through his arms, ready to throw the enemies back with a wave of his hand? I don't know about some of you, I watched Stranger Things recently, and there's a lot of this going on. And I also think of Gandalf in The Lord of the Rings with his staff. So a lot of imagery here. Is Jesus going to be one of those heroes in this moment? Were the disciples expecting a fight, an extremely unfair fight, where maybe they're not really needed? but it's a fight nonetheless. The disciples are ready to defend Jesus at that moment. Enough of this blessed are the meek, blessed are the persecuted, blah, 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 blah. This is the military victory they've been waiting for. This is our time. So in that moment, Peter reaches for his sword and he cuts off the ear of one of the servants in the crowd. I'm sure Peter thought this was, if he was thinking at all, thought this was a good idea at the time, but then Jesus rebukes him. Jesus says, no more of this. Get rid of that sword. Let this play out. But they ask, Jesus, why? Enough with the riddles and things that just don't make sense. Jesus, we've been following you for months and months, and things still don't add up. The disciples had their own narratives, cultural narratives, and personal ideals in mind. With Jesus, I'm sure they saw themselves as winners. They were with the Messiah, after all. And the victory was bound to happen soon. And what is a victory without a show of might or power? A victory does not look like betrayal, an arrest under the cover of darkness, being bound and led back to the city for trial, culminating in a criminal's death on the cross. No, this is not winning. This is a disappointment. I don't know. Maybe the disciples just needed more time to plan this campaign and come up with a morale-boosting title. Nothing says victory like Operation Epic Fury. They might have won otherwise. For some who don't know, Epic Fury is the name of the military campaign that the U.S. launched on March 1st. Nothing says victory like an epic title called Epic Fury. Sorry about that. But no such luck. Jesus is taken away. This is not a victory. Jesus is taken away, and in the confusion, some of the disciples flee. Some of them follow him and the crowd back towards the city. And Peter is one of them. We may not be on the winning team now, but there's still time for Jesus to show his power. This is just a minor setback, everyone. What comes next? Well, the second option, winning and losing. Deny, deny, and deny once more. When Peter follows Jesus and reaches the courtyard at the home of the high priest, he joins those who are working and resting there. They're all huddled around the fire for warmth in the cold evening air. He's probably trying to blend into the crowd, but the shadows cannot hide Peter's identity, and he is recognized as one who is with Jesus, that rabble-rouser that they just dragged past. So the people ask, weren't you with him? Weren't you with Jesus? You're one of his disciples, aren't you? Your accent, you're not from around here, are you? You're from Galilee, just like Jesus. Tell us, tell us, tell us. They demand this of him, and 3 times Peter says, I am not who you think I am. I do not know the man. Peter declares that he does not know Jesus and has no part in this scheme. Then the sound of the rooster crowing, and Peter knows he lost. Hear how Luke describes the moment in Luke chapter 22. The Lord turned and looked at Peter. Then Peter remembered the word of the Lord, how he had said to him, before the rooster crows today, you will deny me 3 times. And he went out and wept bitterly. The Lord turned and looked at Peter. What a statement that is. And I didn't know this detail, or I'd forgotten about it until a few years ago when I was studying this passage. And it's only found in Luke's gospel. But can you imagine that moment? Jesus is still being dragged through the courtyard, past that charcoal fire where Peter is actively trying to distance himself from everything that he's committed himself to in the last few years. Above the shuffle and the kerfuffle, the 2 men, they hear that familiar sound of the rooster. Yet in that sound is a whole lot of meaning. Jesus looks at Peter. Did he look on with love? With sadness? Disappointment? What did Jesus communicate? And how did Peter receive it? Place yourself in Peter's sandals in that moment. Well, I know I probably would have run away in tears as well. Notice that Peter doesn't run towards Jesus. There's still a chance that we could win this, a chance to approach Jesus and declare loyalty to one's friend and teacher. But no, Peter runs away and disappears from the narrative. He retreats back into the shadows with his friends until Resurrection Sunday. So Peter's denial of Jesus is a powerful image. And when I was growing up, this scene was one of the primary examples of what not to do as a disciple of Jesus. The question was always something like, if you were put in this situation, would you deny Jesus? The answer is definitely not. And as a shy child, shy teenager, and shy Christian, I was actually terrified of declaring my allegiance to Jesus. So you can imagine the shame I felt inside. Was I Peter? Was Jesus disappointed in me? It wasn't until later, as a young adult, that shame disappeared. Now, as I matured spiritually and my confidence grew, I would have been more ready to say, yes, I know Jesus, and yes, I am his disciple. But what changed was I had more compassion for Peter and resonated with his response in a different way. We do and say things that to save ourselves from risk, from harm, from disapproval, even if it means disappointing others. That's a lose-lose situation. I'm sure we're all familiar with that. And it sometimes happens when we're confronted with options. Risk aversion is a very human response. So in the case of Peter here, this human response gets his little story right in the middle of the Easter story, in all 4 Gospels, no less. Jesus' journey still takes center stage, of course, but Peter's little side quest here does not go unnoticed, or, in this case, unrecorded. And Peter's doubt here offers a stark contrast to the confidence of Jesus. Even when Jesus is bent over in grief in the garden, asking God to take this cup of suffering away, Jesus carries on. He repeatedly says, I am the one you are looking for. I am the one who must do this. And Peter, here in this story, he repeatedly says, I am not the one who knows Jesus. I am not the one you think I am. Peter's doubt rises. And again, you think you know who you are and what you'll do when ... So winning and losing. Has Peter won or has he lost? Judging by the tears and the running and the disappearing, I say he knows he's lost. But what is the end of the story? Is that the end of the story? Are winning and losing the only options here? So let's look at option number 3, the third way. So up until this point, even and especially to the point of death, Peter and the disciples have been shown the way of Christ. They have walked the way of Jesus. They have sat at the feet of their teacher and friend and Savior, learning that there is a different way to live. There is a third way. Now, this term might be familiar to some of you, maybe all of you, but in Christian circles, this notion of third way can refer to several things, and it is interpreted theologically, even politically. But here in this case, as one option, as Anabaptists, the third way is an ethic. It's an ethos that centers on Jesus as the peacemaking God. It's an ethic that says that violence is not the way to peace, and also that peace is not passive, it is active. This third way is a way that does not depend on the dualistic categories or binaries that we like to box things into. Jesus has troubled those categories and has turned them upside down. A third way, following Jesus, means turning the other cheek, and disarming or taking away the arms of the perpetrator, exposing the fear and the sin that seeks to steal, kill, and destroy. A third way is not picking up the sword or hiding in the shadows. A third way, following Jesus, means shaming the systems that destroy lives and livelihoods, the systems that steal and bomb children in the name of peace and liberation. That is not peace. That is not liberation. The third way is declaring loudly with prophetic imagination and defiant singing in the face of danger. This is not peace. So in light of this way of thinking about the third way, what is this way for Peter and the other disciples? So I've called it disarming discipleship, an active, turn the other cheek kind of journey with Jesus all the way to the cross and beyond. What would it have looked like for Peter and the others to live into the way of Jesus without fear? What would it look like to live with courage and also compassion for themselves and for others? What would it look like to live with the imagination that sees beyond violence and silence as the only defense? What if they had the imagination to see more options and to disarm the violent perpetrators with loving and hopeful action? I'm asking these questions of the disciples, but these are the questions also for us. When I had that change of heart or change of perspective a few years ago when reading the story of Peter's denial, I said I released some of the shame that I associated with the story from growing up. Peter looked upon Jesus with compassion, and I had that same compassion for Peter as well as for myself. But it was more than that. This was a time which was an extended period of time, of years, when I was learning many new things, deconstructing and reconstructing or reimagining what it meant to be a follower of Jesus. I was returning in some ways to the radical and liberating gospel message, the root of our faith. Again, this was a period over a couple of years, but in that time, there was also a lot of cultural upheaval, if I can put it that way, namely the COVID-19 pandemic, the Black Lives Matter protests, and here, close to home, our reckoning with Canada's genocide of Indigenous people and culture, just to name a few small things. With all of this going on around me and within me, I was learning about solidarity and collective liberation, how to extend God's radical welcome to all and dismantle systems of injustice, all while nurturing a healthy spirituality and faith in God and actively living into the subversive way of Jesus, living into a disarming discipleship. I learned that winning isn't the end game. So-called peace through strength is not a true peace. And losing isn't failure or concession. It's an opportunity to reassess and reimagine and recommit to what is most important. Working for justice and renewal is a long game, an arc which we may never see completed in our lifetime. And I realize every time I'm talking about the word peace, I see Heather Peters out of the corner of my eye, someone who has done this work for a long time, and many others of you in this room. We don't see the end game. We will not see the end game, but we keep striving for this work. Sorry, Heather, to point you out. It is a long journey. So when confronted with a choice, we continue again and again to choose the way of Jesus, the way of love. Speaking about love, we go back a few chapters in the upper room before Jesus and his disciples go out to the garden, right before Jesus tells Peter that he will deny him that very evening. Jesus says this in John chapter 13, "Little children, I am with you only a little longer. You will look for me, and as I said to the Jews, so now I say to you, where I am going, you cannot come. I give you a new commandment, that you love one another. just as I have loved you. You also should love one another. By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another. Jesus prays that his disciples love as he loved, and that they are one in unity as he was one with them. In love and unity, they are to move through the world, and this is our calling too, as the ones who have inherited these stories and this work. This commandment and prayer is set before us, and we can choose to love and be loved and to be known by this love. So I think eventually the disciples get it. Peter eventually gets it. They eventually understand why Jesus did what he did and why he laid down his life for his friends in love and solidarity. There is no greater love than this. So Peter's story doesn't end here. And I think something shifts after this moment of profound loss. If we return to that, the courtyard. Peter returns eventually at the resurrection, still slightly unbelieving, but something has stirred anew in him. And so we return to the charcoal fire. Now maybe you're wondering why I keep saying that phrase, charcoal fire, and there is a reason. So there are only two places in the Bible where the Greek word charcoal fire shows up, and it's here in John 18 and John 21. So as a biblical scholar mind, we like to think there's some meaning, and if there's not, we will make meaning out of that. But I like to think these poetic bookends to Peter's story in the Gospel of John mean something. So let's look at John chapter 21. When Jesus returns and he makes this little charcoal fire on the beach and barbecues some fish over it for the disciples. In John 21, after this little meal on the beach, Jesus asks Peter if he loves him. You may know that story. 3 times, do you love me? Do you love me? Do you love me? And 3 times, Peter says, yes, Lord, you know I love you. Yes, yes, yes. Peter is given 3 chances to commit to the way of Jesus and commit to feeding his sheep, in other words, leading the church. This is redemption. This is forgiveness. Around that charcoal fire where he once denied Jesus, saying, I am not, now Peter says, I am the one who will do this work. I like to think, again, in that poetic imagery, the glowing coals represent that enduring flame of trust in the very heart of Peter's soul. It's trust in the process of salvation and renewal and forgiveness, knowing that each day we have the opportunity to live into the way of Jesus. We can win, we can lose, we can trouble the categories and offer an alternative that maybe looks like neither. Maybe it looks like both. How will you follow the way of Jesus? Peter, Peter, where are you? The rocks are hot, your hands are cold, your heart's on fire, your feet are ready to run. Peter, 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 what can you do? Defend with the sword, deny, deny, deny. Is there an option 3? Peter, 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 what do you want? There's winning and there's losing, and there might just be a third way. Our God, what is the way? Beloved, 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 put away the sword and step into the light. That is the way of the world. The way of Jesus is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, generosity, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. This is not the way of the world. This is Operation Quiet Peace, humble joy, and any other words that are opposites of epic fury. This is disarming discipleship. Will you follow?